Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. We're gonna keep reading the book al-Ajubah al-Jaliya fi al-Ahkam al-Hanbaliya by a-Sheikh Musa bin Issa al-Qaddoomi rahimahullah. This is lesson number 41. We're going to be starting the chapter on the Zakat. Let us begin. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. قال المؤلف رحمه الله نفع الله به وبعلومه وعلوم مشايخنا في الدارين آمين. The chapter on Zakat, section on the rulings of Zakat. And if you have the English translation, we're on page 117, and this is the Sheikh Khalid Shah translation. And just quickly, I think for this book of the Zakat, we are going to be sticking quite a bit closer to just what's in the matan of this book. Number one, I'd like to just try to finish this book, and to be honest, I'm losing a little momentum, so let's just try to finish the book. It's always kind of a disaster when a book is started and not finished. And number two, I think that some of the rulings of Zakah, although they're important and they need more detail, for many of us they're not going to be that applicable. So for example, rulings regarding agriculture and livestock, I don't think many of us are farmers or pastoralists. If you are, ahlan wa sahlan, welcome, but this is fiqh that I don't think, especially for our level, we need to go deep into. Likewise, some of the rulings on distributing the zakah, I think in most cases, either we are living in a place where the country or the masjid is responsible for collecting and distributing the zakah. It's not that it can't be done on an individual basis, but this responsibility is not generally on the individual. So I think also we don't need to go deep into all the rulings on that, at least for this level of fiqh. So, and this is just a reminder about the book. I've mentioned this a few times, but it's just to point it out again. This chapter of zakah is usually before the chapter or the book of fasting in most Hanbali Fiqh books. For whatever reason, and in his wisdom, Sheikh Musa bin Issa al-Qaddoomi, he's put it here after the book of fasting, but that's just to make note if you're trying to read this along with a supplementary book, whether it's the matan, the core text of Daleel a-Talib, or one of the explanations or commentaries, just note you'll have to kind of jump back and forth in this case. So the author goes on. Question number 90. For what things is zakat wajib or obligatory? And zakat is wajib for 5 things. A. Livestock, meaning camels, cows, goats, and sheep. B. That which is harvested from the ground. C. Honey. D. Gold and silver. E. Merchandise, i.e. goods purchased for sale at a profit. And we're going to look at all of these in a little more detail, inshallah. Now, zakah is usually translated as something like charity or alms, and al-Maqdisi says in his Sharh of Daleel a-Talib that the word zakat comes from the word zakah or yazku. So, this zakah, it has more of a literal meaning of purifying something. So the idea is if something is growing, and we're talking about the value of an item or items, then you do want to purify it in case there is anything that could be sinful within it. To keep the whole thing pure, and this is looking at more of a philosophical perspective, not philosophical in the sense that it's just speculation, but I mean, we're not looking at something that can actually be seen or measured in the goods that we have to pay the zakah on. So according to the legal terminology, we can say that zakah is an obligatory right of specific kinds of mal, or we can say property, for certain groups of people at a certain time. So if we go to the next question, 91, what are the prerequisites that make zakat wajib? And the author replies, the prerequisites that make zakat wajib are A, Islam, B, to be free, C, possessing the nisab, which we'll discuss, D, complete possession. There is no zakah on a slave owner in contract with a slave where he buys his freedom, nor upon a business partner before the profits are distributed to each partner, and E, completion of a year. And as usual, we're talking about a lunar year. Zakat is also wajib on the wealth of a child and an insane person. So by now, inshallah, we've been benefiting from reading along, especially with reference to the Sharh of a-Taghlabi. We should start to be thinking a bit like fuqaha, like jurists now. So for example, when we talk about al-Islam being one of the prerequisites, one of the conditions, then we should automatically deduce that there is no zakat due upon the kafir, the non-Muslim. Likewise, the second condition for the obligation of zakah, to be free. So likewise, one that is not free, we should deduce there is no zakah upon that person. So the next condition, number 3, is possessing the nisab. And the nisab, we can maybe translate this to the minimal amount of something that zakat is due. So for all the things we're going to talk about, we will mention the nisab. And of course, this is applying to Muslims that are free. Now, with regard to meeting the value of the nisab, where then the zakat will be due, there is a slightly different ruling on what we might call currency, meaning gold and silver, as well as merchandise and other things such as crops, which we will detail when we get to that section, specifically what they are. The point being that these things that we can call currency or precious metals, including the gold, silver, and the merchandise for sale, one need only be approximately at the nisab to have it due. So if one were to be slightly under the nisab in the value, one would still pay the nisab. Whereas for things other than gold, silver, and the merchandise for sale, such as we said, some of the crops that we'll mention, such as dates or wheat, if one is even slightly under, they don't have to pay. To pay, or for the nisab to become or to reach the nisab, where it is considered that one has to pay the zakah, one would have to exactly meet the nisab for these other items other than the gold, silver, and merchandise. And then the fourth condition is to have the complete ownership of something. So this would be applicable in a situation where, I mean, we can think of some type of a joint venture where property could be owned by multiple people. So basically, nothing would be due until those kind of profits are then split up between the owners. And then finally, the Condition number 5 for the obligation of zakah is to complete the hawl or the lunar year, meaning you have that item that is zakatable under your possession for that whole time, assuming you're meeting all the conditions. And when it comes to calculating that time, a small amount, and what's mentioned here is like half a day, wouldn't affect in counting to when that is due. So now this is out of the book, but this is just kind of a reminder or an explanation that, I think a lot of people are in the habit of paying tax once a year. Maybe they're thinking it's kind of like the system in different countries where you have to pay the tax annually. But in fact, this type of zakah is just, it is becoming due throughout the year. It's just a matter of when you reach that amount where the nisab, where then zakat would become obligatory, and then you pass the year. So if we're talking about like gold, you could be buying gold and then finally you've reached the nisab of gold. Then let's say 6 months go by, and at the same time you have animals. So as the 6 months have gone by, now your animals have been increasing in number, and now they're also zakatable. So now from this time they have to wait a year. So you're going to be paying, assuming that you maintain the nisab, you're going to be paying first after that year the zakat on the gold, and then 6 months after that, when your animals are then reaching the nisab for a year, you're then going to pay on the animals. So the point is, you really have to be wary of when you reach the nisab for different items and that you maintain it. And then you have to be aware, and like I said, we're also on the lunar calendar, not the solar calendar, so it is kind of, to be honest, complicated, especially if you have more possessions. The point is, if you just have this idea like I'm paying every end of Ramadan or something like that, you could be mistaken, and you may be possessing the nisab for a longer time. Going past the time that it's due. So please be wary of when you have the nisab and keep track of it. And just to re-emphasize, just like what was mentioned in al-Ajwaba, it's also mentioned here again in Daleel that, the zakah is also due on money for children or those that are mentally incapable. So don't think that you can hide zakah money under a child and just say, oh, he's only a child. The age or what other kind of status, like having the sanity, these are not conditions for zakat to be due. So please be wary of that. And many people may open bank accounts for their children, and maybe because they're children they're not paying attention to what's there, but it's just a reminder, this is also zakatable. Now something important to take note of, and it wasn't mentioned in al-Ajwaba, but the obligation for zakah would not come into effect if one were in debt, and this, when you calculate the amount of the debt, it's going to take you below the nisab. So for example, let's say the nisab for gold and silver is the value of $2,200. And you have gold at the value of $2,500, which you've possessed for beyond a lunar year. So you are $300 above the nisab. But at the same time, you've borrowed some money. You borrowed $1,000, which you still need to pay off. So you could subtract that amount from the amount of the gold you have, and then this would essentially reduce the value of your gold. Instead of having $2,500 worth of gold, you would calculate it as $1,500. Therefore, you're not yet at the nisab, and it would prevent the zakah from being or becoming obligatory. Likewise, if somebody dies, any obligation of zakat is just like an obligation for debt, meaning that if they die, whatever is left from his possessions, his zakat, if he had the zakat, the nisab and zakat was due, it would have to be reduced from what he has left before it is then divided among his inheritors. And one may not put in his will that zakat is not to be paid. It's something that is a right that has to be paid, just like a debt that has to be paid. So now we're going to be getting into the zakat for different animals. The thing that you're going to have to do if you're serious about studying is just to memorize some terminology, basically the names of different animals, specifically animals of different ages can have different names. And then along with this, when I say memorize their names, these are the Arabic names, and along with this you're going to have to memorize the amounts. So the number of these animals when zakat is due, and then the number, there's a nisab, and then beyond that nisab, then according to the number of the animals, you will see we're calculating what is then to be paid. And I'll also say generally for the animals here, when we talk about paying the zakah, it's not going to be generally a like what we might say like a cash amount. Rather, the zakah is actually going to be an animal itself. If you don't have any background in this, you'll soon see what we're talking about. So the author goes on, 93, how much is the nisab for camels? And he replies, the minimum nisab for camels is 5 camels, and its zakah is 1 sheep. Then for every additional 5, it is 1 sheep until 25. For 25 camels and onwards, it's 1 bint mukhad, a year-old camel. From 36 camels and onwards, it's a bint laboon, a 2-year-old camel. From 46 camels and onwards, it's a hiqqa, a 3-year-old camel. From 61 camels and onwards, it's a jiza', a 4-year-old camel. From 66 camels and onwards, it's 2 bint laboons, or 2 2-year-old camels. From 130 onwards, for every 40 is a bint laboon, a 2-year-old camel, and for every 50 is a hiqqa, a 3-year-old camel. Now I'm putting up here a table that I made, and I apologize, the names are only in Arabic, but inshallah you can read some Arabic. But basically it's going to show you, just according to the number of the camels, what is due. And like I said, this is just a matter of memorization. It's not easy, but just have to try and memorize it. So when it comes to the camels, the terminology is even a bit more difficult. And this has to do with the fact that there are lots of names for different ages of the camels. And this is because the old Arabs, they were a pastoralist people. They valued the camel a lot. So we'll quickly look at a few of the names, maybe also by knowing the definition or meaning of the name. It might also kind of help you remember how it applies to the age of the camel. So now if we talk about what's due for 25 camels, it is a bint makhad. I'm not sure if there's a problem with the transliteration in the English that we're reading of the Sheikh Khalid Shah translation, or if it's possible there's another way to read it, but as I know it should be makhad, not mukhad. And bint, it means a female, so this is a female year-old camel, and it's called a makhad because the mother of this camel should at this time be pregnant, and al-makhid means something that's pregnant. However, it's not like a condition that the mother of this year-old camel is pregnant. That's just what we call it, because theoretically the mother of the year-old camel should be pregnant with its next baby. So then at 36 camels we have the bint Laboon, which is again a female 2-year-old camel. And Laboon is from the word meaning milk, and it's called this because the mother of that 2-year-old camel by that time should have already given birth and is then feeding its new baby. Then we mentioned for 46 camels is a hiqqa, and the hiqqa is a 3-year-old camel, and it's called that because it has then like matured, like, you know, the Arabic word would be like istahaq, you know, it's matured to the point that it can be ridden or it can then be used to carry things. Then at 61 camels it is a jad'a, and once again I think there could be a problem with the English translation. In the Khalid Shah translation he wrote it like jiz'a. I know it as a fatha in the beginning, jad'a. So this is a 4-year-old camel, and it's called that because it has lost its teeth, kind of like its baby teeth. Subhanallah, apparently camels lose their baby teeth. So I mean jad'a, it kind of refers it to being like I guess we would say like an adolescent, hence it's lost its teeth. So these are basically the names that you have to memorize, and then it's just a matter of kind of memorizing that chart that inshallah you're seeing on the screen there, and you'll just have to memorize the combinations for each amount. And I mean in this case the nisab is based on numbers, so according, you know, you're reaching every time you reach a certain number, a different zakah is due. It's not like when we get to gold and silver where it's kind of like a percentage, but I mean for the animals, obviously you can't pay like a percentage of an animal, so it's fixed according to number of animals. And regarding these values, as far as I know, this is all consensus. I don't think there's any disagreement on what we're talking about now for the camels nor for the other animals. So now we go on to the next question, 94. What is the nisab for cows? And the author replies, the minimum nisab for a cow is 30, for which zakat is 1 tabiya, which is a 1-year-old calf. For 40 cows, it is a musinna, which is a 2-year-old cow. Now, as you see, when calculating the amount of cows due, it's a bit easier because we're only talking about these two kinds of cows, the 1-year-old calf and the 2-year-old cow, the tabiya and the musinna. And the author goes on, 95. What is the nisab for goats and sheep? What is the ruling of mixed stock? Meaning might say like a mixed flock, I think is a better word. The author replies, the minimum nisab for goats and sheep. So immediately recognize that we're talking about goats and sheep as kind of an equivalent animal as far as how we're calculating here. The author goes on, is 40, so the nisab is 40, and requires a zakat of 1-year-old sheep or 6-month-old goat. For 121 goats and sheep, it is 2 sheep. For 201 sheep and goats, it is 3 sheep. And for 400, it is 4 sheep. And then for every 100 sheep, it is 1 sheep. And if 2 or different herds of different owners are mixed together, and they share the same space, pens, milking area, stud, and pastures, then zakat will be done as one. So once again, this is a bit straightforward because similar to the cows, we're only talking about, we can say two kinds of animals here. So the 1-year-old sheep is considered equivalent as far as in payment as a 6-month-old goat. And I think you'll see also, the sheep, goats, and cows also a bit easier than the camels, as far as the camels, maybe some of the numbering of the when zakat is available is looking a little bit more random, or I don't know if random is the right word, but at least the values that we're using for cows, sheep, and goats are a bit more even, so the calculation is a bit easier, as well as recognizing the different nisabs, and Allah knows best. And when we talk about having these mixed flocks with different owners, going back to one of the first principles we mentioned, the different owners that we would be calculating the mixed flock, they should all be of people that zakat is due upon, i.e. the free Muslims. And as it is in al-Ajouba, it says almost the same thing in Daleel a-Talib, but basically the animals would have to share all these things we mentioned, the same pen or space, milking area, stud, pastures. They would have to share all these things to be considered as the one unit where then zakat is one has to pay on. And we will see there are a few exceptions to those principles we talked about above. So this would be one of them. Although technically the animals might be owned by different people, but because they're all using kind of the same facilities, we're treating them as one unit. And then the author goes on, section on zakat of grains and fruit. So question 96, what are the prerequisites that make zakat wajib or obligatory for what is harvested? How much is its nisab? And what is its nisab wajib amount? So the author answers, there are two prerequisites for zakah to be wajib on harvest from the earth. From that which is weighed by volume and stored, such as wheat and barley, or fruits, this means dry fruits, such as dates and raisins. The first is that the harvest reaches nisab. The second is that the zakat payer has the nisab in his possession at the time of when it becomes wajib. The time of zakat becoming wajib is when the grains become firm and when the fruit ripens. Nisab is 5 awsaq, which is also 300 sa'. If the land is watered without any exertion, then zakat is ushr, 1/10, meaning 1/10 of the harvest. However, if water is supplied through irrigation, then it will be half an ushr, or 1/20th, or 5%. Zakat of honey is an ushr, meaning 1/10. The minimum nisab is 160 Iraqi ritl, which is 61.2 kilograms. As for treasures or anything mined, then 1/5 zakat is wajib. So, two important things to consider, that which is weighed by volume and that which is also stored. So this is negating things that we would not store for a typically long period of time. So we're talking basically about any type of a grain. This can include wheat, barley, corn, rice. This would also include what we would call beans or legumes, once again dried, such as hummus, chickpeas, adas, lentils, and other types of dried beans. Other types of grains, like that maybe you might perceive it more as a spice, like sesame seed would also be considered here. Then we mentioned also dried fruits, so things like dates, things like raisins. Nuts would also be included, so things like almonds, pistachio, hazelnut, these type of things also zakatable. And with regards to what we mentioned about dates and raisins, as we said, this would be some kind of a dried fruit, so any type of fresh fruit would not be zakatable, like grapes, like olives, like fresh figs, like mishmish, apricot, berries, pomegranate. I mean, any kind of a fresh fruit would not be included here. And all of these things that we mentioned, a tenth would be what is payable if you have reached the nisab. So basically a tenth of the harvest of the things we mentioned is what will be payable. So there are two conditions for this zakat on these grains and fruit to be payable. The first is reaching the nisab, and that will be calculated only after, for grains, after the exterior of the grain is removed, or for those dried fruits only after they're dried. So after grains are, or the outer part of the grain is removed and the fruits are dried, then one would see if they have reached the 5 awsaq, which, as we mentioned, is 300 sa'ah. If you remember, the sa'ah is 4 mud, so the mud is like kind of 2 handfuls. These are approximate measures. I don't want to get into how we might measure them now. I will just say, I think that if you're in a Muslim country, probably there's a fatwa in your country how they measure it. I mean, what's the exact amount? Probably in kilograms. Likewise, if you're not in a Muslim country, maybe your masjid has a fatwa on this. The point being, you don't need to strive to calculate it yourself, as long as there's some other kind of authority that is telling you what it is. Okay, so in summary, the first condition is that these agricultural items must reach the nisab, as we've described. The second condition is that one must be in possession of this nisab amount at the time where the agricultural item becomes obligatory for zakat. Now, the time that a grain would become obligatory for zakat is when it hardens, and the time for a fruit is when it becomes ripe. So al-Maqdisi mentions in his Sharh of Daleel that this is when the fruit is going to be good for eating and that it appears to be ripe. And the point that this is being mentioned here is that if, for example, there were people that are working on a farm and as part of their wages they're receiving some of the crop, then this, for example, would be excluded because it would be in the possession of the farm or landowner at the time when it ripens. Likewise, if you were to buy something, if you buy raisins, even you buy to the amount where you reach the nisab, you wouldn't then be paying zakat on them because they weren't in your possession when they became ripe. Likewise, if someone died and they owned some farmland, and on that farmland were some grapes that were ripening and they were intended to be raisins, and then someone else has inherited the land from that person would not have to pay the zakah because those grapes were not in their possession when they became ripe. And another quick point that a-Taghlabi mentions here in his Sharh, and as well as in other books, is that any type of what's called a mubah, which is essentially a wild crop that can be harvested, meaning one has not planted that crop, it's just growing wild, there would be no zakat on that type of crop that would be collected. So the famous example that a lot of the books give is this sha'ir al-jabal, which is usually translated as like something like the mountain wheat. So any type of this wild grain that one might harvest, as we said, wild meaning it's not been planted, it's mubah, this would not be zakatable. And this concludes the details of the second condition of zakah for agricultural products. Now we mentioned the nisab, or the minimum amount when the zakat is due, as the 5 awsaq. However, the amount that's actually paid is going to basically depend on, as we said, if this is a crop that is being grown just on the rainfall, or if it's something that is being watered, because being watered involves an additional cost. So that is why the crop that is grown only with rain, i.e. with no effort, 1/10 of the amount is due. That is after you have reached the nisab, and it is only going to be 1/20 or 5% for that crop that is irrigated, due, as we said, due to the additional effort to grow the crop. And it is then due upon the owner of that land to process whatever has to be paid, meaning let the grain dry and take the exterior off, or wait till the fruit is dried and then pay it. He can't pay it as a fresh crop. It is the responsibility of the imam, assuming we're living in a country that's being ruled by the sharia, but the imam is the one, he should send a specific collector for these agricultural taxes at the time of when these crops would become zakatable, and the person that he's sending for this job, he should be a trustful Muslim with experience in knowing about when these crops are due, and if they are being paid according to what is required. Okay, now there is the issue of honey. I believe this honey being zakatable is one of the mufradat or lone positions of the four madhahib, if I recall. So if you look at the fiqh books, there could be some discussion or debate about this, but the point is, for our Hanbali madhab, zakat is due on honey, meaning honey from bees, and this was explicitly stated by Al-Imam Ahmed radiallahu anhu. Once again, some of the conversions could be disputed between different countries, etc. So I would once again refer to your local Islamic leadership, how they define this amount, but they're talking about 160 Iraqi ritl, and the author of the translation said that's about 61.2 kg. I think I've heard about 60 kg in other places, but once again, just refer to your local Islamic authorities for the fatwa on the exact amount. And once again, a tenth of the honey would be due once you reach the nisab. And this is for any honey, whether you are so-called raising the bees. I mean, you have your own whatever they call these things, the bee nests. I forgot what you call them. Or this is like, you found some wild honey. Either way, you're paying a tenth. And then the last issue we're covering here is the so-called rikaz or kanz, meaning treasure. This would be something of value that was buried during the time of Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic times, and buried by the kuffar, the non-Muslims. And this can be determined if there are, for example, marks of the disbelievers there. Meaning, for example, if there was a type of currency that was being used at that time of Jahiliyyah that was not used after Islam, that could be one type of evidence. Now, this buried treasure is unlike other types of items that are zakatable in a few aspects, so pay attention here. The first is that there is no nisab. Finding a so-called buried treasure is just finding it is immediately making it zakatable, and the zakat amount that would be paid is a fifth of it. So even if it's something small, you would have to pay a fifth of the value. Like you found 5 coins from, gold coins from Jahiliyyah, you will pay then one of them in zakat. It also differs that this type of a zakah would be applicable to both a Muslim or a dhammi being a person of the people of the book who is living in Muslim lands with that contract agreement. So just in summary, 2 important differences from other items: that there is no nisab for buried treasure, and it can be applicable to Muslims or dhammis, the people of the book living under contract in a Islamic land. And on another important point that a-Taghlabi has mentioned in his Sharh of Daleel, a-Talib, is that this is also applying upon the one who finds this buried treasure. Meaning possession is for the one who finds it, even if it's not his land. For example, you have hired someone to build a wall, they're digging and they find the treasure. Or you've hired someone to drill a well on your land, and while drilling the well, they have found the treasure. So in this case, the finder is the literal keeper. And a final important difference is that if the person who finds this buried treasure has any debt, unlike the previous example we gave, it would not be considered in him having to pay the 1/5 or 20%. So we've finished about half the book of Zakat. Inshallah, the next dars, we're going to finish the remainder of the book of Zakah. So as always, don't forget us in your dua, and our scholars of this world and the next who've guided us the straight way with their great prophetic inheritance of knowledge. And let us not forget our brothers and sisters across the world. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.